You're watching BCTV. We're all about Branford. You're watching BCTV, Branford Government Television, a service of Branford Community Television. This program is brought to you in part through the support of the town of Branford.
Call this meeting of the Branford Planning and Zoning Commission to order. It is Thursday, February 20th. I have 7:04 p.m. We'll introduce members of the commission and staff. It appears that we may have to take a short recess and reconvene because our Zoom meetings apparently are limited to 40 minutes. We have 5 minutes and 41 seconds left, it looks like. So with that, what we'll do is we'll introduce members of the commission and staff, make a few announcements, and then take a recess and come back on. So let's see who's here for the commission. Joe Chadwick. Joe, are you here?
Joe Chadwick is present.
Thank you, Joe. Fred Russo, Commission Member Fred Russo, are you here? Fred, you're here, but you're muted.
Fred Russo present.
Joe Vayuso. Joe, are you here?
Joe Vayuso here.
Marcy Pelusi. Marcy, are you here?
Marcy Pelusi's here.
Massimo, are you here?
Massimo's here. Yes.
Sharon Hutner. Sharon, are you here?
I understand she won't be attending tonight.
Okay.
Harrison, town planner. Oh, former town planner.
Okay. And our staff is our assistant planner, Evan Brining. Evan, are you here?
Here.
And our that's our interim town planner is Evan, and our alumni town planner is Harry Smith, here to help us with some zoning amendments. Harry, you're here. And our clerk and recording secretary is Michelle Martin. I am Chuck Anders, chair. So I've got that we have 4 minutes and 17 seconds left. We can, I suppose, Fred, do you want to read the notice of public hearing?
Yes, I can do it in 4 minutes.
Okay.
Legal notice, Town of Branford. The Planning and Zoning Commission of the Town of Branford, Connecticut hereby gives notice of the public hearings to be held on Thursday, February 20th, 2025 at 7 p.m. by remote technology to consider the applications listed below. Information regarding how to participate in the public hearings will be provided on the Commission's meetings agenda that will be posted on the town's website at least 24 hours prior to the meeting. Application 25-1.5, special exception for an accessory apartment located at Cut and Two Island West Island Destinations LLC in care of John Petrosky, applicant and owner. Application 25-1.6, special exception coastal site plan for a single-family residence located at 32 Wood Road LLC in care of Susan Norden, applicant and owner. Application 25-1.8, special exception for a church in a place of worship located on 151-155 Meadow Street. Lauren Wiggins, applicant, Meadow Street Properties in care of Jorge Gill, owner. All said hearings, at said hearings, all persons will have the right to be heard. Copies are on file in the Planning and Zoning Commission's office at the Planning and Zoning Department, 1019 Main Street, Branford, Connecticut, 06405. Written communications may be sent to the above address or to planning and zoning at branford-ct.gov. Branford Planning and Zoning Commission, C. Andres, chairperson.
Chuck Anders, chair. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you.
According to my looking at the screen, it looks like we have 2 minutes and 25 seconds left until this particular meeting will be, I guess, scheduled to stop. So what we will do is we will take a recess. I have 7:07 p.m. Evan, I don't know, will you be able, should we say reconvene at 7:20? Would that give you enough time to start another meeting?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. So what we'll do is we will take a recess and we will start up again at 7:20 sharp. So same process and same Zoom number. Harry?
Yes. Just to clarify, so folks out there attending, this will disappear and you'll have to click on whatever you clicked on to get to this meeting. As the chairman mentioned, it's the same meeting number. It's a recurring meeting, so you should be able to get right back into the virtual room. We just have to get everyone out, close the doors, and open it up again, apparently.
Okay. So with that, we'll take a recess and see everyone at 7:20. So we can proceed with our public hearing items. The first public hearing item is our zoning regulation amendments that have been proposed by the commission. That's likely to take over an hour or so because there's a number of changes. There are two other public hearings that may be shorter. What do people think about that we take the other public hearings first and then go to the amendments to allow the others to perhaps not have to wait around?
Fred Russell in favor.
Thanks, Fred.
Yep. Joe, are you so in favor?
Joe, that's good. Fred, that's good. Joe Chadwick,
Joe Chadwick's good with that.
okay. And Marcy, is that okay?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay. Massimo? Yep. Okay. Okay, then. So then we'll defer for item number one, the public hearing zoning amendments. We'll defer that one until after the other public hearings. So let's go to item number two, which is Vincent Federico, applicant, Nancy Tomasini, owner, 15 Etzel Road. This is a special exception and coastal site plan for grading within 100 feet of a coastal resource. Is the applicant ready to proceed with that?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. Jim Preddy, Criscolo Engineering, 420 East Main Street in Branford. Let's see, I'll go to the, see the map?
Yes.
This is the property at 15 Etzel Road. As you can see, you guys had approved a couple of years ago. It approved the coastal site plan for this new house. And we also did one for this house. They're both being built at the same time. This particular house here, they did some work, and I do have some photos if we need them, but there was always a parking space proposed here because they needed to get flood vents on this side of the building. And they have the electric meters here. They tiered this so that this parking area was a little flatter to get the flood vent where they needed to get it. And then this platform of the electric meters is up at flood elevation +1 because the flood zone is very close by here. And then there's some, there's another tiers up. The ground always stepped up here, so they tiered it, and then it steps back down around the other side. So that wasn't part of the original plan. We did get a variance to allow the retaining walls where they are. The plan was referred to DEEP, which said that they don't consider it a flood and erosion control structure. But because of the 6.8 grading within 100 feet of wetland or critical coastal resource, we had to also come before you folks. Again, it's already here, stabilized. They're actually waiting for their CO. The whole site's pretty much done at this point.
Chuck Anderson, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Preddy. Evan, do you want to review the staff report?
Sure. Like Mr. Preddy said, this was before you guys in 2023 for a special exception in coastal site plan. Some changes to the grades and construction of the retaining wall as a part of the changes to the approved plan. They meet the bulk requirements of the R3 zoning district. They satisfy the off-street parking requirements. The applicant did not provide an erosion sediment control plan. However, the activity proposed as part of these site plan changes is already complete. There's no stockpile on the plan, but again, this activity has already been complete. The retaining wall section, section 613C, requires a setback from the property line equal to the height of the wall. They received variances from the Zoning Board of Appeals on January 21st, 2025 to allow the wall to remain where it's located. They meet the coastal site plan review requirements of section 9.7, and the application was referred to deep. Comments were received today in response to that referral, and they were circulated to the commissioners. Nothing, no recommendations from them other than that the utilities would have to be on a platform at an elevation of 13 feet, which I believe they are. Based on the application materials, it appears that the special exception criteria are generally satisfied. Staff recommends one finding, that the coastal site plan is consistent with the goals and policies of the Coastal Area Management Act, and the following conditions. One, prior to the start of construction, erosion control measures shall be installed to the satisfaction of the zoning enforcement officer. Of course, this work has already been completed. I just left this in there just in case there is anything else that has to be done, as well as the additional condition for any additional measures to control any dust or fill brought in to the site if deemed necessary by the zoning enforcement officer. Third condition is that any lighting has to be compliant with section 6.7. And final condition is that all conditions of the previous approvals shall remain in full force and effect as they may apply.
Chuck Anders, Chair. Thank you, Evan. Mr. Peretti, quick curiosity question. I think the deep letter said that they don't consider this retaining wall to be a shoreline flood and erosion control structure. Do you know when they do? I mean, does it have to be in the, at a certain location or height, or how do you determine that?
Yeah, so most of this, Jim Preddy again, most of this retaining wall is up out of the flood zone. There's only one little corner that really kind of broaches the flood zone line. I think when there is an opportunity for wave run up and you're proposing something down in the flood zone, I think then they consider it a flood and erosion control structure. This particular, if you recall, this particular site, when we did the other house, there was some back and forth with DEP and a coastal consultant about a much smaller retaining wall, but that kind of went around the outside of the site. And they had determined that if there was a flood wave particular to the site, it would be coming from the other direction, and that wall along the water wouldn't amount to anything. So they let that go as well. This what we're talking about here now, it actually sits way up higher on the lot, which is why I think they don't consider it.
Sure. It's just sometimes hard to, you want to know if it is or it isn't, and it's hard to tell just by the definition sometimes. So
sometimes figuring that out gets a little complicated because of the direction the waves are coming.
Sure. Thank you. Are there any, Chuck Anders, Chair, any questions, comments from commission members before we open up to the public? Hearing none, let's, does any member of the public wish to comment? Evan, you want to review the process for public participation?
Sure. Down at the bottom of your screen, there's a raise hand button. Select that if you'd like to participate or ask any questions. There's also a chat feature that you can type into there that you'd like to speak, or type your questions into there. And if not, wave your hand in front of the camera and I will try to unmute you. I don't see anybody.
Don't see anyone. Okay. Okay, then we can close the public portion of the of this public hearing. Mr. Peretti, any additional comments?
Nope, I think it's pretty straightforward.
Any further comments from commission members or staff? Hearing none, then I think we can close this matter as a public hearing. This may be something we can take up later. Thank you, Mr. Peretti.
Yeah.
So that's item number 2. Item number 3 is Island Destinations LLC, care of John Petrovsky, applicant and owner. This is cut into Island, a special exception for accessory apartment. And I understand we're going to open this matter and continue it to our March 6th meeting. And the reason is that there are two other applications listed under new business for grading, I believe, in an oversized accessory structure. So we'll consider them all at once. So this is for item number 3, the Cut and Two Island application. If you're here for that one, we're opening that and continuing that to our next meeting, which is Thursday, March 6th at 7 p.m. Also a Zoom meeting at the same access method. So with that, we can move on to item number 4, which is 32 Wood LLC, care of Susan Norden, applicant and owner, 32 Wood Road. This is a special exception coastal site plan for a single family residence. Is the applicant ready to proceed with that?
Yes, Jim Preddy again, Criscolo Engineering. If you recall, this was this had come in under different owners not long ago. They were building a rather large house, and the neighborhood was not happy with it, and there was a number of items back and forth, and but I think they finally did get approval. Those owners decided to sell to one of the neighbors on the south end of the site. They're proposing, and I'll share the screen, they're proposing to actually just move the existing house into a zoning location that's conforming. Let me zoom in here. So the dashed line here, the dotted outline is where the house sits now. They're proposing to pick it up, move it onto a new foundation. You can see this is the building setback line here. This is the coastal resource setback line. Here's the street line setback. So they're moving it into a conforming location, kind of redoing the driveway a little bit, although it exists here now, and then reconnecting the utilities. I think the part of the other application, there was a number of trees that were proposed to be removed. The only tree that is being proposed to be removed is the one that's right here that's kind of growing into the house currently. So I don't think there's any way to move this house without losing that tree. So we're proposing to take it down. I believe the owners submitted a letter signed by pretty much all of the neighbors in this area in favor of this application. I think that all the same people that were against it before are in favor now.
I know.
And that's it. Again, they're keeping the superstructure of the house and building out a new foundation. There will be no blasting here. They're going to get whatever crawl space they can get. Part of the old house does have a basement, so kind of half of this house will end up with a deeper basement, but the newer section, they're gonna dig down and stop when they get to the rock. If there's a random high spot, they may hammer it out, but again, no blasting. They're just gonna live with however deep they can get. And I believe that's it. Trying to keep it simple for you guys. I know you have a lot going on, but yeah, I suppose you folks remember this, but I'll take questions.
Chuck Anders, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Preddy. Why don't we have Evan summarize the staff report? Evan?
Sure. Like Mr. Preddy said, this is a special exception for grading in the coastal site plan. A little bit of minor regrading, part of the relocation of the home outside of one of the setbacks to eliminate that nonconformity. They are meeting the bulk requirements of the R4 district. The previous 2024 special exception and coastal site plan application included revisions to the site plan based on concerns from the neighbors or from the neighboring property owners. They had to show vegetated areas on the proposed vegetated areas that were made up of appropriate and salt tolerant plant species consistent with deep guidelines. Section 5.1D of the of the Branford zoning regulations says in coastal site plans where there are environmentally sensitive or ecologically fragile natural resources, the commission may require the provision of a vegetative buffer in order to protect and preserve such resources and coastal water quality. Because this does allow the commission to determine if this is necessary. Staff would like the commission to make that determination. I believe they are protecting the majority of the vegetation on site. But I have prepared a condition, should the commission want to require this as something that should be shown on the site plan. They meet the off-street parking requirements. Erosion control measures are proposed on the site as well as a stockpile. The commission would need to find that the erosion control measures proposed, to the extent that they are alternatives from those in the 2002 deep guidelines for soil erosion and sediment control, are acceptable. The applicant meets the coastal site plan review requirements of section 9.7. And based on the application materials, it appears that they meet the special exception criteria. Staff recommends one finding, that the coastal site plan is consistent with the goals and policies of the Coastal Area Management Act, and the following conditions. Prior to the issuance of a building permit, erosion control measures shall be installed, and any additional measures deemed necessary by the zoning enforcement officer shall be installed. Condition 2, any lighting has to be compliant with section 6.7. And the potential condition I proposed was that prior to the issuance of a building permit, the following shall be met to the satisfaction of the town planner or his designee. The applicant shall revise sheet 1 of 1 entitled Coastal Site Plan to show a vegetative buffer consistent with section 5.1D, made up of appropriate and salt-tolerant plant species consistent with deep guidelines.
Chuck Candace, Chair. Thank you, Evan. Evan, did we require a vegetative buffer on the initial application?
After the neighbors had pointed out that line in the code, the applicant voluntarily, I believe, made changes to their site plan to show a vegetative buffer. And we made it a condition of that previous approval that prior to certificates of occupancy being issued, the buffer would be installed.
Chuck Candace, Chair. Thank you, Evan. Mr. Preddy, do you have an opinion on the vegetative buffer issue?
I did talk to the current owner about that particular item, and they've actually already started removing some of the invasive vines and things on site, and they were willing to add that to the plan, some salt tolerant plants. Keeping in mind that, there is a lot of exposed ledge near the edge of the property, but there are some areas, some opportunities that some vegetative areas, salt tolerant plants can be added. So they were okay with that.
Okay, so they were okay with that condition?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, any questions or comments from commission members before we open up to the public? Hearing none, then does any member of the public wish to comment? Evan, just remind us again.
Sure. Down at the bottom of your screen, you can select the raise hand button or type into the chat that you'd like to participate or ask any questions. I don't see anybody.
Okay. So we'll close the public portion. Mr. Preddy, any additional comments?
No, I don't believe so.
Any comments from commission members or staff? Hearing none, then we can close this matter as a public hearing, something we may be able to take up when we complete our public hearings. Thank you, Mr. Preddy.
Thank you.
With that, then we'll turn to item number 1, which are our Planning and Zoning Commission proposed regulation amendments. And with that, we're going to ask our alumni town planner, Harry Smith, to run with that, give the introduction and the explanation of the proposed amendments.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me back. This was last discussed by the commission on May 2024. You may recall that was the second discussion, actually. There's a prior discussion back December 23 when we went over an issues list of all the possible amendments that seemed like it, with limited amount of staff availability, could be crafted into changes to the regulations. Since the May meeting, I have worked on some changes to the draft that was discussed then. And did it intermittently in October and November. You may recall that at the opening of the public hearing on January 16th, I believe, I noted that there were a couple of things that did not make it into the draft when I got into reviewing the minutes in detail in some of my notes, and wanted to go back and make sure I had gotten everything. So I went back and reviewed the entire video of the discussion back in May of 2024. So that's something I've done since the meeting in January. Also, for that meeting, I don't know if you have in front of you, I do have up on, in the screen, I could show you when I share my screen, the 3 documents that were sent to the commission. One was just the clean list and actual wording of the proposed zoning regulation amendments that was referred out to the referral agencies, DEP, and the Southern Central Connecticut Regional Council of Governments. There was also a version that showed several of those proposed amendments that were the subject of some discussion, and that the commission wanted me to either revise or change wording or so forth. So this document number 2 was, there's basically a version of document number 1 highlighted to show the things basically I worked on since May 2024. Also, the document number 3, there was the minutes of the May 2nd, 2024 meeting, so that you all had all the stuff in front of you. And again, I've got this all up here for reference purposes when we get further on. So what I'm planning on doing is going over the main document that was submitted to the referral agencies, just walk everyone through the amendments. And if anybody has any questions, jump in, please, and let me know. We can go over things. I also want to review a letter we received, a comment letter from DEP in response to our referral to them that the commission should have received in the packet for the February 6th meeting that we had to do in person. And then I'm going to review the few proposed changes that I did not pick up initially, and some typographic errors we've noted since then. So that's the plan. So I'll get going here and share my screen. Unless there are any comments right off the gate here. No? Okay.
Oh.
All right. So everyone should be able to see document entitled Proposed Amendments in Branford Zoning Regulations, dated December 11th, 2024. Again, as noted here in the parentheses, this is, it shows as highlighted text, changes from the draft that we prepared for the May 2nd meeting. So I'll just whiz through here. There is this language that's been in the regulations since 2016 regarding an amendment, a moratorium that the commission put in place regarding some residential development in the, I believe it was the R1 and R2 zone, which is no longer in effect. So the discussion back last couple of meetings was to just take that out of the regs. It's just redundant text. Bring us to the next topic here, which is definition of restaurants. I think when the regulations were rewritten back in 2011, the language is inadvertently altered to essentially allow the sale of foods, and basically the interpretation was any kind of beverages, including alcoholic. This has become somewhat problematic because of the word "or." So the interpretation from town council was that this did not preclude the approval of basically a bar that was not serving food as a restaurant. So the language that's proposed to be added here to clarify that is the sale of alcoholic beverages for on-site consumption may only occur as authorized by a restaurant liquor license issued by the state of Connecticut, and shall not constitute the principal activity of the use. So, we did changed beverages to non-alcoholic beverages, so it's clear that those can be served without any kind of, would be included as part of the definition. Also, restaurant fast food had sort of the same issue. I went back and looked at the definition of restaurant fast food in previous regulation back before the 2011 rewrite, and the 2008 definition did include this wording. So the commission's consensus was to put this in. This was back in May when we discussed this. So no changes here from May. The site triangle has been, there's a couple issues that come up with this. It's not so much the definition of the triangle, it's the definition of the height. So at what point there's sort of a window, if you will, certain distance above ground, up to a certain distance, another distance. So it's like a window within which we need some clear viewing. This wording was looked at by the town engineer's office, and I think we tweaked just to did some wordsmithing based on comments by some of the commission members in May. So just to keep it as clear as we can keep it. So this is right out of the discussion in May, this wording at a height greater than 3.5 feet above the ground. Stein, the discussion here was to try and there's another part of this further down, that signs include window signs. They're already actually defined in the definition section of the regulations. And the proposal further on down is to continue to allow them without a permit, but to preclude window signs constituting prohibited signs that are not allowed in the regulations on walls and on or anywhere else. This definition was, there was some discussion apparently in 2011 about through lots, and there was apparently going to be some wording in here to refer to a definition or have a definition. The definition was pulled out, but this cross-reference was not. So this just cleans it up. The commission still has the ability to go back and decide how it wants to define through lots. I mean, I think it's pretty clear. There's standard references you guys can use that we've done in other circumstances. So that was discussed in May as well, that we need to pull that out. This is just as was proposed and agreed to in May, just to clarify that the, I can't believe this is a special exception listing of uses here. So it's the list of the special exception uses. Right now it just says, I believe accessory structures over 750 feet. So this just clarifies, well, it just says sheds, decks, garages over 750 square feet. But the terminology related is accessory structures, including more than just sheds, decks, and garages. And it's not just over 750 square feet, it's also over 15 feet high. So it's one or the other. And that's the requirement, another place in the regulations for accessory structures that require special exception approval. The next one here, there was some discussion about where this should be. So I believe the consensus of the commission was to not just throw this in here, that to put this in a separate item. So that was done. Again, determined to be through lots, but we didn't have a definition anyway. So at some point in the future, you can put one in if you feel the need, but I think the standard references sort of clarify what it is. And this was an issue that required a variance. There was no ability on this particular property to put an accessory structure. They were precluded from doing it in the front between the facade of the principal structure and the street. So therefore, we have two sides of the building fronting the two streets because it's a through lot. Can't have the accessory structure there. You can only have it in the side yards. but the side yards in this particular case were not big enough for the accessory structure. The setbacks precluded anything. So the property owner went and got a variance so they could put the accessory building in one of the front yards, if you will. And that's what this change would allow anyone to do without having to go get a variance. You could pick one or the other. Again, this was talked about in May, but the comment was put it in a separate section. And there's another change here that I missed to sheds that we talked about, utility structures, and I'll get back to that when I go to the list of things that did not make it in here. The home occupation just is a cross-reference to the definition, which contains some limits on what a home-based business can be. So that's not totally wide open, just to make sure anyone applying for it knows they're cross-referenced back and take a look and see what they can do, what they can't do. Again, no changes to the requirements there, just a cross-reference. We had, I think, a pretty substantial discussion about the center business zone, and I can flip to the, hopefully everyone can see this map here. So this is the area in this sort of rusty red designation. Town hall's about here, Main Street. The building's right up adjacent to the sidewalk along Main Street, basically between Montaukese and the start of South Main here. Going down the hill to Rose Street, including the Rose Hill Apartments and a couple of properties here at the corner of Cedar and Rose Street. Does not include the, drawing a blank on the name of this, the new development done by the Bigliotis, Founders Village, I believe it's called. So there is also another district here not shown on this map, but shown down here. So again, this is the BC zone. This is the portion of the Main Street's overlay zone that overlaps the BC zone. And you may recall we had a discussion about the density allowed in the BC zone. So flipping back here, that is a pretty significant amount of density. And what that is equivalent to for the efficiencies at 1,000 square feet per dwelling unit, the acre is 43,560, so you can have essentially 43 dwelling units on an acre. And a lot of these properties are probably developed with, I don't know, I mean, it's the kind of development that's in the R1 and R2 zones, which is, basically one dwelling unit per 6,000 square feet. Then you have one bedroom, 36 units per acre, and more than one bedroom would be 31 units. So the consensus was to, as a kind of a placeholder, I'll go back to the map again, in recognition that the development here along Main Street is a lot different in character than the development further down the hill. Most of those properties are still small houses and have been converted to buildings and so forth. There's a couple of larger buildings. There's the police station. And these are town buildings and the community dining hall center. There was also the Rose Hill Apartments here, which is included in it. And during the discussion, I was asked to take a look at that and see if the proposal to basically drop the density down to the level of the R2 zone, which is 4,000 square feet per dwelling unit, would make that non-conforming. I did take a look in the file for that and found a variance that was issued specifically for the density of the Rose Hill Apartments. Because that density, I believe, was 90 units on a little over 84,000 square feet of property, which would exceed the density allowed in the BC zone, including efficiencies. So they did have a variance. So if the commission made this change, that would not make the Rose Hill Apartments non-conforming. And there's another section here. Just might as well go right to it. On the next page, We talked about how to treat the portions of the center business zone along Main Street, which have some apartments and upper stories that are much higher density than 4,000 square feet per dwelling unit. So the average, when I looked at it, I kind of computed how much density was there in these buildings already, roughly, and it came up with about 31. An easier way than doing this, even though it's the density as it's stated in the regulations currently is, well, there are no other districts where they're broken out like this, but I think just to preserve any and preclude any potential issue developing, maybe the better thing to do is in the portion of the center business zone within the Main Streets overlay district, just leave the density as it currently is in the BC zone. So rather than have this 31, maybe the better thing to do as I'm rethinking it is to change the wording here. I can come up with something for the next meeting, just to allow the 1,000, 1,200, and 1,400 for the efficiency one bedroom and more than one bedroom. So we can, if any questions, we can talk about it now or later, whatever you'd like to do. I just wanted to throw all that out there since we're on the topic. Anything now? You want me to keep going?
Harry, why don't you keep going? Do you have text that you're proposing for this in lieu of?
I don't at the moment. I can probably come up with something. But let me just leave that aside for now and keep going through so we get all through it. And there, in the end, it's probably better if we're going to have a list of some changes, and assuming the commission wants some or all of them, the better thing to do is probably for me to integrate all that into the document and come up with a final document for the commission to vote on, assuming you want to go ahead. So I can include this in that final document. All right, moving on. This is the standard that is required by state law. So the legislature made some specific requirements for parking for multifamily dwellings. They provided an opt-out provision that has no time expiration on it, like the accessory dwelling unit that the commission took advantage of and opt-outed of, along with the RTM. So for now, we've got a state law requirement and we've got a contradictory requirement in the regulations. So at this point, consensus of the commission was reflect state law. If you want to opt out later, you can opt out later and change the requirements if you want. So this would just make sure it's consistent so that developers aren't looking at our table and proposing 2.5, and then we go in a staff report and say, hey, I really need to do 2. And they do that. We've had a couple of circumstances like that. This is just some wording changes to treat the Town Center Village District and the Stony Creek Village District consistently, so that they have these same requirements, prohibiting internally lit signs. No change from the May discussion. Again, I mentioned the window signs, so this would add that category in here in the table and saying they are allowed, these are all things that are allowed in all zones with no permit, property identification or improvement or so forth, current existing text. The 2 proposed additions here are the window signs, as long as they're not a prohibited type of sign, or they violate some a provision of 6.6b, which I think is streamers and flashy things. The other one proposed here that the commission was went ahead and endorsed was gateway signage, which would basically replace those blue arrows you see down by the train station. There has been a proposal to kind of get a consultant and look at some wayfinding signage, they call it too, and hopefully they'll move ahead at some point. But at least this would allow the replacement of those with some kind of more organized signage without any permit required. Just a little wording change here, just some cleanup. This is just some language that's inserted to clarify that, and there is other provisions in here, but just put it right up front that if you meet the provisions in section 6.8, then you need a special exception approval. Compliance with all the requirements of the section. This seemed to be a typo in the 2011 amendments. So these are exclusions. So in exclusion basis, you certainly don't want to allow the movement of more than 100 cubic yards as an exclusion. You want to control that. But the movement of less than 100 cubic yards, I think the intent was to exclude that from the requirements of 6.8. We had you may recall, we've had some, at least a couple of projects where rock slopes have been proposed and approved by the commission. One was the Aldi's Chase Bank site. There was a requirement on that approval that a professional engineer, as required down here, certify the stability of the slope at completion. We've never gotten that certification. So there's one, these buildings still has a temporary CO. Part of that problem was I don't think sufficient information was submitted in advance. So nobody really knew the nature of the slope. It seems that not, as a sort of not a licensed professional engineer, but it looks like it's more sedimentary rock in nature that's really not stable. There is a catchment zone at the bottom. They're not very high walls, but we had a discussion about whether to take this out. I think the consensus of the commission was to keep the possibility of allowing rock slopes in, but to require some additional information up front, which is enshrined. This language would do that, which require a specialist in geotechnical engineering, to review evidence provided. So make sure that the sufficient information has been provided. The material exposed is solid rock, so it can be certified in the end. There's another change down here that, again, there's no highlighting, so there's no change from the text that was reviewed back in May. This would provide for rock slopes and retaining walls basically be treated the same. Right now, retaining walls cannot be any higher than 8 feet. You can terrace them, but you have to have a 4-foot wide terrace between the two sections of retaining walls. This would limit the enormous rock slopes that we've seen a couple other places.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yeah. Sure.
When you talk about retaining walls, you don't indicate whether the retaining walls have footings and where the start of the height of the wall is calculated from.
I'll address that later on, but yeah, that's an issue, and I've proposed some wording to address that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll get to that. No. The next section on drainage and stormwater control, most of this wording are things that the commission has put as conditions on approvals per the recommendation of the town engineer. So rather than have to put a condition every time on the approval to address these issues, proposal is to put the wording right in the regulations. There is some changes I did not catch here that are on another document respect to talking about plantings in drainage basins, retention basins, as well as to make sure that we're not talking about all projects everywhere. We're only talking about projects that meet the threshold in section 6.9. So I'll explain that when I get to this other document of the things that did not make it in this document. But I just wanted to point that out that, I did not ultimately forget them. So all this language was, recommended by the town engineer and accepted by the commission essentially in May. Other issues arisen since the 10-foot requirement for a paved apron back from the edge of pavement of street has been put in place. The town engineering office has dropped their requirement down to 2 feet, and they issue driveway permits. So to make the two requirements conform and not get people caught in the middle of calling the engineering department and saying, oh, I only need to do 2 feet, coming back and come to us and we say, hey, you need to do 10 feet. Proposal is drop it down and make the 2 requirements consistent. And add in here, just for future reference, if the engineering department decides to change that, this would piggyback on that change. Again, there's issue just Marcy mentioned. This is inconsistent, frankly, with the definition in 613C1. And I'll get into that in a minute, but rather than measuring from the top of the footing, which could be buried a foot underground, there's another change I'll talk about when I get there, proposed to measure from the bottom of the exposed wall to the top of the wall. This was subject of interpretation back in the spring that basically certification, if you will, of an interpretation the commission made years previously, that retaining walls less than 3 feet would not need to be set back from the property line. And we had a pretty long discussion, I think, in May on this, and the clear consensus I recall the commission was that this interpretation commissions made previously should be put right in the regulations as was recommended years ago, but never actually executed as the staffing changes.
Harry, I really don't remember that as being a consensus because there's.
I went back and listened to it pretty clearly. And I think we almost did a roll call vote, but we can talk about it again. I'm happy to do that.
Well, so. I only mention it because in certain zones you've got buildings that are closer, and I think a better way to express that is that the height of the wall should be the same distance off the property line. So, or otherwise have a special exception so that we can make sure that it's not. I mean, we just heard a case where it wasn't an issue being on the property line, but I would like to make sure that it's not the case in certain zones where buildings might be close to the property line or other structures like accessory buildings, because you can have a accessory building that's 5 feet off the property line, and if you're introducing a retaining wall near it, even though it's 3 feet, it could or may or may not have an impact. I just think that it needs to be evaluated.
Yeah, we could talk about that. I don't know if you want to do that now, but I know, I will. I mean, I did carefully look at the recording of the May meeting, and the commission is certainly open to changing its mind, and we can go over this. But I'll have to dig a document out, so maybe it's better to defer it to the end of the discussion if you want.
Right, and then this is a public hearing, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So we're gonna have comments too, so see what people think. Then, yeah. Moving on for now. This final plan, this wording is just incorrect because it's talking about once preliminary plans are approved and the final plan is supposed to be submitted with 24 months. So it's just incorrect, and this would clear that up. This has to do with the interpretation the commission made about how to measure the queuing spaces lanes with respect to the McDonald's application of West Main Street. And the interpretation at that point was they would queuing spaces and measurement of that would start at the ordering window and not the alternative, which was the pickup window, which I think was the issue there, pickup versus ordering. This is slightly revised from the discussion in May. I think in May, we just put the issue out there. Is this what the commission wants to do, enshrine their interpretation? And the consensus I recall was they did. So that you did want to do that. Any questions? No? Okay. Moving on, there are several sections in 8.1 regarding nonconformities that were put in place before state law changes went into effect, I think a few years ago now, after reviewing the town council, of course, state law supersedes local regulation, but to clean that up and make sure that the inconsistencies don't have to be, that there's no question about it. these sections that really are not in alignment with state statute proposed to be removed here. And basically what I understand the statute, and anyone wants to jump in, feel free, at the moment allows a property owner, if they had a non-conforming building and they took it down and they can state clearly prove it was their intent to resume that building, they can reconstruct it even if it was totally demolished. And a lot of this language has to do with once you've changed it, you can't resume it, or it's destroyed by fire, and then there's more than 75%, blah, 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 blah. None of these things can be put in regulations, is my understanding anymore. They can't be followed. Moving down here to some of the wording here, this is just an error. It should be town, not city planner, and added a reference into the Stony Creek Architecture Review Board and the Stony Creek Village District, which was not done when this regulations put in. So just clarify that applies for both. So I would just treat them both, or my successor would treat them both the same, both districts, in terms of making minor changes. This section has all been superseded by yet another change in state law to refer to location approvals, which is really something that the commission's been sort of tasked with, that is totally apart from the rest of the statutory setup with respect to zoning. Has to do with motor vehicle law, in my understanding. And the commission's been taken out of it, CBA's been taken out of it, was going back and forth for years, and now it's responsibility of the zoning enforcement officer. So proposal here is just take all this out. There's no hearing, there's no anything, my understanding, there's nothing specifically the CEO needs to look at. She can just look at the location approval request from the state puts out and sign it, as long as the use is allowed in the zone. There are several, this section on procedure requirements, there are several references to the commission, and it should really be to both the commission and the ZBA with respect to who gets the applications, planning and zoning department, date of receipt, when basically the process of accepting and reviewing applications, which is basically the same in terms of the time frame and so forth. So this reinforces all the requirements the ZBA has for how they review applications in their application package as well. This section 914E and consultations, proposing taking all that out. We talked about this in May. This wording is something I worked on with the town council a couple of years ago, and this mirrors exactly the final comments I got back from town council. Were attached to an email. So it basically provides for the commission, and this was another statutory change that allowed the commission to put this requirement in its zoning regulations clearly. So rather than just do a peer review for a traffic study, you could also do a peer review when the commission finds particular technical aspects of an application require the review by one of these professionals, and you can charge reasonable fees for that. You need to make findings that the proposal is of such a technical nature as require expertise not available from staff. So you can't simply say staff is overloaded, we'll go hire another planner or somebody to review the application. It has to be something technically staff here, the engineering department staff, for example, geotechnical engineering. We had the Wood Lane subdivision, you may recall, we had to, through another special fund, because it was a contaminated site, paid for a licensed environmental professional to review the groundwater contamination and whether basements could be put proximate to that. So this would allow, that fund wasn't in place. This would allow the commission to go ahead and charge the applicant for hiring a geotechnical specialist to review that information. I talked about this in May pretty extensively. The rest of this is pretty much some cleanup here. The ZBA inserting here again through 914, all the rest of the requirements. This one, I looked at the statute, and we can do this from 7 days of the date of receipt, which is the day the commission has the application on their docket. Basically, it's I think it's 35 days after the data comes in the office or the date of the next regularly scheduled commission meeting. Rather than wait 7 days after it comes in the office here, we give the staff a little more time to make the appropriate notice and still be in compliance with statute. Again, adding the ZBA here, notification of water companies. That's a requirement of the applicant, I believe. This is notification of DEP. Again, this language is so old, it did not have the second E. It used to be Department of Environmental Protection. Now it's Energy and Environmental Protection. Again, just specifying that section of the statute. We did get a comment back from DEP itself saying there is another section, 22A-104, that they would recommend be added here. So we could do that. Again, adding language ZBA is in addition to commission. We talked about changing some of the bonding requirements here to do a couple things. One is to allow staff, rather than having to have the commission establish and release bonds less than $5,000 in value. And I'm going to propose a little tweaky change to this I'll go over in a couple minutes. I'll just leave that alone right now. There's more error here. Just this should be 10.3. I just noticed that tonight. This is said 10.3 correctly, and 10.3B is correct here, but this overall reference at the top, that's just a typographical error. So the other change here would be to preclude surety bonds from being an acceptable form of financial guarantee. I think there was a discussion about this in May that I recall that sort of reinforced my take on it. Change here, cross out surety bonds. We made the wording here, and the statute does not require commission to accept surety bonds, but if the statute's changed again back, then of course we have to take them. So it's covered here. And also any other form of financial guarantee mandated by state laws may be amended. That is it for the main body of the amendments. I think I'd go ahead and look at this letter here from DEP next. Which took exception to the change. You may recall there was a list of exclusions, the section 6.8 review. I probably should put those up just quickly. So here are the exclusions. Farming, soil disturbance, parcel larger than 5 acres. You can move up to 1,000 feet without requiring 6.8 special exception, and a lesser amount on a smaller property, and even smaller property, even a lesser amount. Normal maintenance or repair of roads and driveways, sanitary landfills, stockpiling of street maintenance, equipment, materials, installation, repair of septic system. But there is also in here, in the preamble, an exclusion of the exclusion, if you will, so that if you have property and you're within 100 feet of a critical coastal resource and inland wetland, none of these exclusions apply. So basically everything, every disturbance of earth, movement of earth material, and including removal of trees and vegetation cover, needs to get special exception approval. There's been discussion in the past about how this, at least within the wetlands, overlaps with inland wetland review, since 100 foot from an inland wetland is their upland review area, and they have jurisdiction. And also sometimes with the requirement for a coastal site plan. So the proposal from staff that was reviewed by the commission in May was to drop 100 feet to 25 feet and to eliminate the need for some of these special exception applications. One of the thoughts being that if there was sort of this 25-foot area or setback from in a wetland, that to get away from the requirement for a special exception approval from Planning and Zoning Commission, someone looking to do work there would simply go to the Wetlands Commission as long as they were 25 feet back from the wetland. So it'd be kind of a de facto setback. And wetland staff sort of thought that was a good idea, would sort of give an incentive to keep things at least 25 feet back. DEP in their letter did not support dropping the requirement from 125, particularly with respect to critical coastal resources. And they have a lot of wording here. It sent this whole document to the commission back the end of January, so you should have had it in your packet. But just quickly, they think the review is important to have, and it could be, adverse effects if the review doesn't take place, and commission doesn't put potential controls and conditions on work being done. They do also quickly object, I think, sort of categorically to the change of the setback from the wetlands as well. And here's that language they wanted to put in 22A 104. In addition, this is the 914K. So I just wanted to make the commission aware of that. And last thing I'll do is just go through this memorandum was sent to the commission for the last meeting. And this just goes over some things that did not get in the main amendment package. That if the commission want to go forward these, we'd have to add to it. We have to modify what's in front of the commission in terms of the application. So the first one here is to add in section 3AB. And we had this discussion in May about utility required service platforms and stairs within the 100-year floodplain, and that they be exempted so they be treated similarly to sheds less than 200 square feet in size. There was, in the discussion about this, I think it was recognized this people have had to get variances for these things because Eversource says you got to put this platform, you got to put the stairs in, or else we're just not allowing you to do what put the generator there. So the language, rather than have this exemption for sheds of 200 square feet or smaller, staff is proposing this language. Commission to consider all accessory structures must meet blah 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 side and rear setbacks of the zone, except for the following: sheds 200 square feet or smaller, or utility required service platforms, including stairs, required to access these structures. Utility required service platforms within the 100-year floodplain, period. So if you're out of the 100-year floodplain, this doesn't apply. So as far as we could see, that follows a discussion in May, pretty much, and talk about that in a bit. The second one, this is a requirement in 9.8 for special exception approvals. Currently, a copy of the site plan needs to be signed by the chairman and filed in the office of the town clerk. They don't have a lot of room downstairs for anything, particularly full-size plans. And I did check with them today, and they do have digital copies and make digital copies of the maps that are filed, but that doesn't relieve them of the requirement, it's my understanding and their understanding, to keep the paper copies. So like a record that's filed on the land records, the books continue to be generated with new documents being filed. The same thing with the plans that are filed. They have to be retained as paper or Mylar copies. So the proposal is to eliminate this wording from section 9.8 I2, so that doesn't need to be done anymore. Basically, would have a copy of the approved plan in the file here. It just wouldn't be filed with the town clerk if your commission decides to put this in. These were things I added to this memo, if you will, after the first time we sent it to you in the end of January. So these are a couple of additional changes saw. Again, as I mentioned, we went through section 6.9. This is stormwater drainage. Rather than the reference being to all projects, it would be to all projects requiring plans per section 6.9C. And I can show you that if you like. Getting close. Okay, so here are the threshold requirements for the applicability of 6.9 in terms of having a stormwater drainage and management plan. Commercial industrial development, residential developments of 3 acres or more, excluding single family, 2-family, and proposed impervious surface coverage 50% or greater. So when that language back here talks about all projects, it's all projects that meet those thresholds. Also, is some discussion about we talk about maintenance items. The proposed wording was cyclonic separators, and to add those specifically in. And I should probably pull up 6.98 so you can see the context. Let me go back here. They've already got some recommended changes. So, go back here. So 6.9H1, and there's 6.9H1. So it says here, such plan, this is have a stormwater maintenance plan, required to follow manufacturer's recommendations regarding maintenance for elements of a stormwater management system, including but not limited to infiltration units, cyclonic separators, and let's go back to the wording change. So the wording here, instead of being just cyclonic separators, would be cyclonic separators and or plantings in stormwater retention basins proposed for the purposes of water quality treatment. So that would add plantings in, and that was, I think, the discussion back in May that should be something added into the required maintenance plan. Does that make sense? Sorry about it's one reason I want to put all these together once the commission decides whether to do them or not.
So it's encouraging plantings in those basins is what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think it was your comment, Marcy, if I recall.
I get lost sometimes in the text about what the basic intent of the change is trying to say. So I just need to say it simply.
Yeah, it's unfortunately, without inserting them in, which I didn't want to do, and so nobody knew where they came from, I wanted to, and I started listing them, so that's what I did. And then 613C2, this is the other topic was mentioned about how to measure retaining wall height. So you've got this measurement here from the top of the footing, which is buried sometimes a foot on the ground. So with this potential change here would change that top of footing to the finished grade at the bottom of the wall. And in the regulations, I'll just read this out right one section above that. Actually, we'll go look at it. It's just about there. Sorry about it. This is pretty tedious, so it's sort of the nature of the beast. So right now you've got 613C1. We have retaining walls here. 3 feet is measured from the finished grade at the bottom of the wall to the finished grade at the top of the wall. But down here, you've got the 8-foot measurement is from the top of the footing to the top of the wall. So this change would make this section, in terms of how you measure the height, consistent with this section. And basically with information we usually get on site plans, frankly, because we don't get usually where the top of the footing is. They usually say, here's the bottom of the wall, in terms of the proposed finished grade.
And Harry,
Yeah.
and depending on the type of wall, it may or may not have a full footing to frost, or it may just be a spread footing, right? So there's those
Different
differences
possibilities, yeah. This would
in the way the
need to think
wall
about
is
any of
built.
that. Yep.
Even at 3 feet, you could have a footing to 3.5 feet below that wall.
Yep. And just recognizing that anything taller than 3 feet needs to be designed by an engineer, needs a building permit, so it gets reviewed, and how the footing's set up, is looked at. So moving on, it's a few typographical issues. The word square was inadvertently, so there's a strikeout through the letters ARE, so they just need to be fixed in this section. Wall in section 613C above was inadvertently proposed for deletion. And here, let's see. So right here, that wall should be retained. Strikeout should start it unless. Back in section 911, this was the section on nonconformities, I believe. I did not add the word reserved, so that would screw up all the numbering of the sections. So this should be added just to retain the numbering. And you may recall when we talked about the bonding, we said less than 5,000. And it was pointed out to me that you're probably going to get a lot of bonds for $4,999. And the better approach would probably be, say, equal to or $5,000, just to allow sort of more rough estimates than to the dollar to be submitted. Just when we get to decision making, there were no specific references in the POCD to any of these specific changes. Most of them are very, technical and not covered in the plan or addressed. Commission is tasked with looking at the proposed amendments to make sure they're consistent with the comprehensive plan of zoning, which is the history of the development of the zoning regulations in the map. One other item brought up in May was that I should relook at the Connecticut guidelines for soil erosion sedimentation control, because they've been updated since 2002. So one more change here would be to update that reference to the 2024 version of this document. So unlike normal applications, the commission has essentially unlimited time to consider this. So, you're acting in your legislative capacity like Congress, as opposed to looking at it like a development review application. And you have greater latitude, and you can approve or approve with modifications or deny. And we would need an effective date when the commission chooses to approve it. And that is essentially it. That's the DP letter below. So I can go back to the retaining wall issue, which is the only thing I think at this point I had on my mental list of things to go back to, unless it's something I missed. Or anything else you guys want to talk about or cover? Or we open it to the public too?
Why don't, Chuck Anders, Chair, why don't we just go over since it's only one thing, maybe we can talk a little about the retaining wall, then we can open up for public comment.
Yeah, let me see if I can find the document. It was Jane Ellis put together a one pager on this is basically a recommended was an interpretation question brought up by Jen Aquino when she was a ZO back well before I think she moved over in 2018, but that fall. So before then, I think maybe a year before then. Does you want me to just get into it verbally, and if we want to go back to that,
Sure. Why don't you pull up the text, the section we're talking about, and then put that in front of us, and you just talk about it.
Okay, and I'll see if I can pull up the minutes I have also, just for whatever that's. You know, I don't think there's a lot of verbiage there. So we're talking about 613. So there's the section here we're talking about, 613C3. Let me just find the meeting minutes. This is good. So this is the memo that we had up. So this is from Jane Ellis. And this goes back to 2015, when the commission had a discussion about this. And at that point, the interpretation was that if the wall was less than 3 feet, then it needed to meet retaining wall standards, and therefore no setbacks were required. There was a recommendation at that time that this wording that is now proposed for change be added. And in 2015, that was right before I got here, and I don't believe, or I think the town planner at that point either just left or was leaving, and there was I did not get here till June of that year. So I think with the staffing changes, this just got sort of lost in the shuffle of that, as well as the Costco application. That's the note from the meeting minutes. So it's, I think in terms of the wording and the regulations, it seems pretty consistent with what the commission wanted to do previously. If there's additional issues that we should be aware of, maybe I think that's what you were getting at, Marcy, as far as I could tell.
Yeah, I mean, since 2015, I've seen some scenarios where, you know, like I think when I was thinking about that in 2015, I was thinking from the standpoint if you had a parking space and the overhang with the bumper to a wall, and not necessarily thinking in relation to a retaining wall relative to, a property line that might have, like if you've got an accessory structure 5 feet within the property line and somebody's doing something abutting that to cause well, it depends which way the wall's retaining, right? You know, they could be digging an additional 3 feet or 3'6" to get below the frost, which could have impact on that structure, or it could be a segmental wall, but you're overturning off of a wall, and Joe Chadwick, please, speak as an architect. There's always that calculation, even though it's minimized because of the height, there's still potential impact on the neighboring property. And I just, in the case that we met in person with, it was easy to determine that it was not an issue at the property line because any abutting structures were so far away. But, we have a lot of shoreline areas where we're just seeing increased pressure to either build up because of flood issues, and people are trying to maximize their size of their houses and their views and different things. And I just don't feel the same way anymore about, every scenario. And I'm not saying that, it's, yeah, I'm not trying to create more enforcement or review, but in some cases, I think it's important, right?
Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, I don't really get in, at the town planner level, haven't gotten into some of the specific situations. It's more comes up related ZO zoning permit level, pretty much. So I can't really speak to some of the experiences either Jen Aquino had or Jane Ellis has had. I don't know what the thoughts of the other commission members are at this point. So
Well, it ends up being a a fairly complicated and I think difficult to regulate within this structure condition because you have a problem of angle of repose of whatever you're digging in, and you have a problem of property value. If it's very valuable urban property and you need to get every square inch out of it and get right up to the property line, you spend the money on an easement and sheet piling, drive the sheet piling and build whatever you need for a retaining wall to get to whatever limit you need. I don't think we have that kind of property value at this point in Branford, but we do have angle of repose problems because the soil is so sandy. So to go dig down the 40 inches or so to get to the bottom of the foundation, you need at least that much space to the side, plus a little bit more to have somebody get down there and build a form and such. So you're really ending up with like sort of 6 feet to a property line for the face of wall when all is said and done. I could understand how that number might have been derived. But again, as property values increase and you're trying to get more clearance or for whatever functional reason, there are ways to exchange money and technology to get that dimension changed. And I don't know what the nature of that has to do with planning and zoning to regulate, because an awful lot of that stuff is regulated by the building code as far as the stability.
yeah, but they wouldn't get into the building code side. Wouldn't get into a wall less than 3 feet, right? Because it wouldn't need a building permit.
I don't believe it's less than 3 feet. No, I was actually trying to look it up here as we were talking.
Yeah, that's what I understand, but I could be wrong.
I just feel like it's more respectful to neighbors to have the height of the wall be offset from the property line. So if it's a 2 foot wall, 2 feet, 1 foot, 1 foot, 3 foot, 3 foot, as just, and then if they need it to be on the property line, get the variance. I'm not saying that it's not that there aren't cases where it's not where it wouldn't be acceptable to have a 3 feet wall, but I think if we made it more general as far as encouraging them to set back off of the property line where feasible, then some things would, or maybe in certain zones, or maybe, within a distance of, if the neighboring has, a structure within 5 feet of the property line, then it becomes, an issue of setting any new walls back, or, some other language that can clarify for areas that are potentially impacted by this that we can't anticipate down the road, because there are a lot of areas. I mean, the Etzel Road application, that's right on the property line, right? You know, you
Yeah,
start,
it sounds like you're looking to leave it without an exemption and then to try and have a mechanism to address site-specific issues through, I mean, it can always be done by a variance, but whether it could be done in the regulations, that would be kind of tricky technically, I think, I certainly don't have the competence in all the potential issues that would come up.
well, I think the issues come up when there's an because I often feel when I'm looking at site plans that we're not looking at the impact next door. And that's just a blanket statement for everything that I think is important because, scale and appropriateness is affected by what it surrounds. Whether it's a 3-foot garden wall or an addition or a house or what have you, you know, go back to the density requirement for, accessory apartments or any of these things. A lot of the regs,
Yeah,
I think, are limited by not having a mechanism to really consider what's happening on the abutting properties.
yeah.
You know,
There's some default considerations like 50-foot setback for the rock slopes and a 50-foot setback for blasting for rock slopes from adjoining property. But some of them pretty arbitrary, and the nuanced kind of look you're talking about. I frankly I don't know how much of that is supported legally, how much you can get into. I mean, there's some. If it's a special exception approval process, then you've got some considerations there of the impact on the neighbors. But I don't know, Chuck, if you wanted to add anything about the limitations on that kind of consideration by P and Z. I mean, it's not open ended.
No, I mean, you have property rights and you have a right to develop your property again.
Right.
But I mean, my concern is that we've been interpreting it this way since 2015, and what this does was codify the way we've been interpreting it for whatever 9 years or since 2015, and now we're saying we would, even though it's not written in there, we'd say we want to leave it as is. Which I mean, Marcia, I heard you say it should be equal to the height of the retaining wall from the property line. Wasn't it? This addresses from parking spaces and the property line, but this says so if you have a 2-foot high retaining wall, it should be 2 feet and whatever, as opposed, which is what it says now, and the added language is the way we've been interpreting this 2015. So my question is, why did Jen request this? And what has been the history of the interpretations I think we've interpreted that way? And I don't know, you'd have to speak with Jane Ellis, our zoning enforcement officer, and get a better sense of this and get her opinion, maybe, her thoughts on this. Because my immediate reaction is we've been, this is a codification of interpretation we've done for 9 years, and that we should, to be general consistency, we should probably do it, but maybe we shouldn't. I mean, Marcy, I think your concern is the potential impact to the neighbors, is what I heard you say. I don't know, some things, again, there's the whole, it's your property, you can't cause harm to your neighbor, you can't have erosion and that stuff. I understand that. That's probably the purpose for the retaining wall in the first place, is so you don't have impacts on neighbors. But I'm not, if we want to not do this, I would want to speak to our zoning enforcement, talk with Jane or someone to get more of a history of why we did this and how often it's been interpreted that way. I mean, that's sort of one thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's an option to do it, and then, even if very quickly get a follow up from Jane about that, if you like, or, I mean, if you didn't do anything, the interpretation would still stand, I think, was what I'm hearing, and so whether you put it in or not, unless you put some other wording in there, that's how it's going to be, unless the commission changes the wording in the regs, right?
Well, I think we would say, and we repeal our interpretation. I mean, I think because that's how if we're declining to put the text in there, to me, that means no. And to me, it's a stretch.
Okay. All right.
I'm not sure I follow that. If you don't put the text in, what happens?
If we don't add this, then I think it's, the way it reads now is that any retaining wall, doesn't matter the height, it could be under 3 feet, has to be set back a certain distance from parking spaces and from the setback into the property line. And we've been interpreting in a way that doesn't follow the text of the regulation. We've been interpreting it in the way that as if that has been in there, even though the text is not in there. And that's not the way you should do it. If we ever got appealed, a judge looked at this and says, hey, you know, it means what it says. And it doesn't say that. And if you want it to say that, you should amend it. And so that's sort of what we're doing. We're getting around to amending it to conform to the practice, that the way we've been interpreting it. But frankly, I think that's what you need to do. You actually need to text it. If we decline to adopt this amendment, then that means that all retaining walls, no matter what the height, have to be an equal distance, 6 feet from a parking space, and equal to the height from the property line.
So I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
Because then if they needed to be closer, then it becomes an ask. Right.
And then you have to get, in your opinion, is they should get a variance. Yeah. And I understand that. But and my question is why and that's the way it's written. That's the way it's written now. So why did Jen Aquino request that we do it this way? And was she basing it on the way it had been interpreted before and the way it's been subsequent? I want to hear from the people who have to enforce this thing and get their thoughts.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know where the 3-foot height came from personally.
Well, the 3-foot height, I understand it comes from the limit of what's required under the building code for a building permit. So if it's under 3 feet, my understanding is you don't need a building permit for the wall, and you don't need a designed wall. And it's sort of my little anecdotal knowledge is that a lot of folks right at a property line might put pipes and a couple of railroad ties and create a de facto wall of 2 feet high and fill up to it at their property line. And is that something in ignorance of it, all of a sudden whatever happens and the zoning officer is going to go out and say, hey, you can't have that because it's got to be set back from the property line. I mean, if that's what the commission wants to do, that's, the other thing we can look at is what other communities do and see, because this is not something unique to Branford, and see how that's done, just to give you, more informed basis for a decision too.
Well, what I'm not hearing is if there's something on the abutting property, if the neighbor has an accessory, a shed within the 5 feet, right? Or on the property line, those scenarios where the garages, there's lots of garages that, right, are right on the property line, and then someone wants to build a 3-foot retaining wall on the property line because they can. Now that creates a 1 foot little water entrapment around the garage.
Right. Potentially, yeah. And, of course, the accessory building shouldn't have been, it's supposed to be 5 feet back as a default, even if it's less than 200 square feet. But let's say, pre-existing whatever, the situation is such that the structure's right there. I mean, there are situations, that are going to develop, but
I just think it's just a good neighborly practice, and then if there's a reason or way, then there's review because I've seen cases where, they've got it in one place, but because they created the wall, it created an overburden onto the neighbor's property with the sloped, they just put sloping soil into the neighbor's property because, it was vacant at the time.
Yeah.
So there's
I'm not crying an X either way. What the commission wants to do is just the upshot would be if you have a tight property and you want to, do a grade change up to 3 feet, it's a high bar, at least theoretically, to get a variance, and you'd have to meet it somehow. And I don't know what that argument really be, because every property's got slopes on it pretty much, unless you're flat as a pancake. And I don't know what your argument would be for a variance, honestly, but what the hardship would be.
I would have to question the appropriateness of doing something.
Well, I don't know. I just leave it there. So when you guys tell me what you want to do, we can.
Yeah, I guess one of the things we aren't sort of noticing with this is that the definition also includes the ingredients of site triangle as far as visibility, entering it and leaving it. But I think we're also contemplating the retaining wall within certain constructs in each of our own heads, because on a sloped site, if I have a left to right, right being high, left being low site, and I want to level it,
Yep.
I'm going to be making a retaining wall with my right-hand neighbor being higher than me and my left-hand neighbor being lower than me. So I will have a retaining wall in both circumstances.
Yep.
And I don't think that 6-foot clearance applied to a rate retaining wall in parking really makes the same equivalent circumstance or the same equivalent reaction in both circumstances. So I think we just need to think about that a little bit more. But the original language seems to have been crafted for a fairly specific reason.
I almost
A
wonder if
3-foot
it
high
was
retaining wall
for
and
low walls at driveway entrances, like little gateway entrances.
yeah,
You know,
Well,
or and I do vaguely remember it having something to do with, segmental walls don't require additional excavation in a lot of cases when they're under 3 feet. And that may have been part of the discussion to why they might be appropriate on the property line. But, it's very hard to, like hindsight's 2020, years later doing different projects, doing more residential type projects, now I'm seeing situations where you've got garages at property lines or whatever. And, you know, and I just, and I see this time again that we're not always looking at what's next door when we're reviewing these applications. And there's a constant pressure to get, driveways to the edge of property lines, or there's no planting at the edge of property lines, and then what's the grade with the plantings and things like that. And it's just, I don't know, I would like to see more consideration to the neighbor, somehow. And I think having the way it was written, where the wall is set back, the height of the wall from a property line kind of builds that in. And then if they want to come in with the exception, we can review it.
Or we wouldn't.
Well,
Yeah.
how you review it. I mean, that's what process do you use? You need some criteria, or else it can't be a blanket. Hey, this is a requirement unless you go to the commission and the commission says don't worry about it. You need some specific criteria to meet thresholds set by different court cases. My understanding, the McKenzie decision.
Well, I mean, I think criteria is if there's structures within a certain distance
Well, you'd have to write all
on
that in.
either side. I mean, that to me is a defining characteristic, is if there's structures within a certain distance of the property line or neighboring structures, that's
Yeah.
a very specific criteria that this could be formed around.
And do you think in your mind that's the only one you'd be concerned about? Or
Well, that it's, and the
Any
sight
wall
line
that's-
is,
well, that's covered by the other section. Really, they couldn't extend into the site distance.
well, I mean, it's, and I think walls that are being, if you're doing a 3-foot wall that you're going to build a footing onto, then I think that footing to build it, if you're going to frost, is, it's very difficult to build it without impacting going onto the neighbor's property, right? And, you
Well,
might,
yeah, but you're also talking about, lower things like even a raised bed for a garden, which might be, a foot and a half or something, depending on whatever it is, it could be a stone wall that's,
Mhm.
not very, a 2-foot one, a 1.5-foot one. So I think that was again, I want to talk to Jane also, that whether those kind of situations is what this reinterpretation of you was trying to get at, trying to allow that right to the property line, since in general, that kind of low level thing would have no real impact on a neighboring property. And I understand what you're saying. In a certain circumstance, it could have an impact. But it seemed like there were a lot of circumstances where it didn't. So how to get at that, something I really can't do on the fly tonight. So I don't know whether just by default you want to take the change out and state on the record that we're revoking our interpretation and let it.
I don't know if we want to. I don't know. First, because we're not ready to vote. I'd like to hear more from the ZEO, and maybe you look at other towns you suggested on that. Because I would like to have something there. I like having something, maybe put it 2 feet or something. Because I think there's a number of scenarios. I think you can dream up scenarios where there could potentially be an adverse impact, but I think that's outweighed, frankly, by the many times when it wouldn't, and it's a reasonable use of your property. But I get Marcy's point as well. Let them go for a variance, even though there's no
Well,
hardship.
set it back the height of the wall, regardless of the height, right?
Well,
Depending on whether, as Joe said, it's on the right side or left side of the sloping property, you know.
Yeah.
yeah, that's a certain scenario. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, the neighbor on the low side
Right.
should have the wall set back. The neighbor on the high side, maybe not so much, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, where do you want to?
First, so there are other commission members have any comments on this, and then we'll open up the public. Sounds like we're not there. There's whatever. I don't know. We've heard from a few people, but Fred or Joe Vaiuzzo or Massimo, and Joe Chadwick. Any additional thoughts from you guys?
Fred Russo, I think you're right, Chuck. I think we should hear from or contact Jen and see why she said what she said. We're doing a lot of speculating about what it is, what it isn't. She may have had something totally different in her mind. I don't know what it is, but the fact that this has been going on since 2015, I think another meeting or two is not going to hurt anything, quite honestly. So I think I would like to get all the information, all the facts, no speculation, and then we'll just have to sit down and decide one way or the other which way it's going to go. Just from my own personal feeling, and I just hope we're not trying to find a solution where there is no problem. I don't know how often this has come up. I don't recall it being that often, and maybe it's more of the exception to the rule. So I would just get the information from Jen and also from Jane, get some input from them, and then we should come back again and make a final decision. That's my feeling.
Great. Thanks, Fred.
Yeah.
Joe Vaiuzzo, any thoughts?
Well, I seem to have this similar thoughts to what Fred said. I mean, we don't know what the situation, and we're trying to make a regulation fit everything. There's so many different scenarios when it comes to walls, and property lines, and sloping and whatever. It's me, like you said, Chuck. It's been working for the majority of, as far as we can tell, the majority of the applications. We're not having this problem. There's a minority here and there. And with Marcy saying, well, maybe some cases they can go for a variance, but hard to fix something that maybe it's not broke. You know, in my opinion, I mean, there might be some occasional problems here and there, but it's how could you write a regulation in this situation to fit every single thing? I think it's almost impossible. But I think we just have to talk to the zoning enforcement officers and see what their comments are, and try to come up with something that's reasonable. But I don't think whatever we write is going to be 100%. There's going to be situations, but like Fred says, but you know, let's not fix something that's not broke. That's my opinion.
Thanks. Thanks, Joe. Massimo, any thoughts?
No, I don't really have much to say on this.
Okay. It sounds like we can we're probably going to I don't know, we can continue this, or we can make the change anyway. Or we could do it one way or the other if we close the hearing. But
You could get comments in from Jane and Jen. They're both staff, I think, right?
Yeah. Let's get some more info from them, and maybe Harry, if you want to take a look at other towns, see what they do, and then we'll talk about it further.
Okay. All right.
So, anything else before we open up to the public? Okay. Why don't we? Yes.
I have one question.
Yes.
I was a little confused on the density conversation with Main Street when we're going up to the 4,000. What's the basic intent? Are we trying to minimize the density, or keep the density closer to the R2?
Exactly. I think the idea was this would be sort of a Band-Aid and a holding provision, so that you could look at what does the town want to see happen in that whole slope to the north of Main Street? Do you want to see these properties get more densely developed? Do you concerned about historic preservation, controlling the density, or what? Or I mean, it never stops someone from combining some properties and coming in with a PDD proposal, something like that too, or even
I'm
just
just,
the regulation. So we just sort of preclude default.
I just think at
That's
some
development.
point, and I don't think it has to be today, so I'm not really saying not to make the change that you suggest, but at some point as the town grows, as a commission, we need to kind of see how our regulations encourage the spread of development, whether it's horizontal or vertical,
Sure.
and that density. So, I mean, I'm content to keep it to the R2 sort of level, but obviously, you look at Main Street, that's not at R2, right?
Yeah, that would be excluded from it. Yeah,
That's much higher.
right.
Well,
That would just be left the way it is. Yeah.
Thanks, Marcy. Anything else before we open up to the public?
Yeah, have we ever done the math on that 4,000 square feet per any kind of unit? In terms of, the kind of parcels we have and what kind of coverage we actually get. No, I shouldn't say coverage. What kind of
Development.
development or building density? Because at some point it seems like there isn't much opportunity to build very much when you have 4,000 square feet per dwelling unit.
Basically, my quick understanding is the regulations sort of match the pre-existing development patterns. So a lot of the town center obviously was built before zoning, and some of the shoreline areas where the R2 exists. And I think there was some issues with setbacks and so forth, and there was a zoning regulation amendment, a little fuzzy on it, that allowed the application of a different district's setback requirements depending on the size of the lot or something like that. This goes back a while before I got here.
the undersized lot.
The undersized lot, thank you, yeah. So it allowed lower setbacks and things for an undersized lot in some of the larger zones. So, yeah, you've got a point, absolutely. And I think particularly in the town center, there needs to be a much more careful look at, well, what's there? What does the town want to see? What's the capacity of different things like the sewer system, for example, for higher densities of development? There's a lot of pressure out there to, create more housing, for example, because the market's so hot. And the housing's needed. It's just where, how, and how much. So the questions to address. We've had one proposal anyway in the BC. It was sort of a back property behind a existing house. They kept the existing house and did this. I think it was on. We just approved it within a month or two ago. It was some bit of a struggle. I had to go. It was wetlands involvement too, and that's the other thing, is some of that area is wet, so there's other limitations. But so yeah, I think it should certainly benefit from a pretty detailed analysis and some public input and discussion about what's the community want to see back there. But for now, a lot of density is allowed, and it goes back pretty far back to when it was sort of envisioned as Branford's downtown, if you will, because you can really have density that doesn't match what that area's been developed to date to look like.
Well, it's encouraging more vertical density in a more concentrated area as opposed to a more sprawled density, spread out.
That's not necessarily bad. It's just,
I'm not sure what people want. That's all I'm saying.
Right. That's
Yeah.
exactly my point. Yeah, I think that was the idea. Was
Okay, why don't at this point we see if we have any public comments? Evan, why don't you remind everyone how to participate for public comments?
Sure, you can click the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen or type into the chat that you'd like to ask a question or make a comment.
So does any member of the public wish to comment on the proposed amendments? Evan?
Sophia Nori.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Evan. My name's Dr. Sophia Nori, and I live at 34 Howard Avenue. I wanted to address Section 6.13C. And I know that we've been talking a lot about, like this regulation and like this interpretation may work for like the majority, but like what about like it may not work for the minority, and we're not sure if we're solving for something that's not a problem. So I just wanted to bring up the situation that we are currently in, because I think it is emblematic of like the types of problems that can come up through this potential proposed interpretation. So some of you may know of the situation. So my husband and I recently purchased the house at 34 Howard a couple years ago. We moved out of the home, started rebuilding it. While we were rebuilding the home, our neighbors it built a retaining wall that and part of it is on our property. It's right on the property line. And in our neighborhood, a lot of the properties are non-conforming properties because they were built before zoning. And so our home is about 26 inches from the property line. And we built within we basically rebuilt within the existing footprint of the home. And so what this is unfortunately brought up for us is that the construction that was done on our neighboring property was done without permits, and they were issued a cease and desist as well. But what this has brought up is that these retaining walls that are on property lines can often like do a lot of damage. In this case, we unfortunately had to resort to an emergency injunction because the retaining wall was was flooding our property, and the judge also determined that to be so. So there's a restraining order on the retaining wall as well. And this retaining wall at some points is under 3 feet, right? And so in there is a reality where that a retaining wall like this could continue to do damage to a property, and if it was under 3 feet, it would be unregulated. And I think that when these retaining walls are on the property line, because there are so many properties around town that are non-conforming or built before zoning, there are a lot of structures that are actually like right on the property line or a couple feet away from it. And so even a retaining wall that's under 3 feet can be potentially very damaging. And I just wanted to like show if Evan, do you mind if I can share my screen so I can show examples of this?
Sure.
Thanks.
Let me make you, okay. You should be allowed to now.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Let's see. Okay. So I'm gonna just open up, show a couple things. Let's see. Okay. Okay, cool. Here we go. Can you see this?
Yes.
Oh, yes, we can.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to show you a couple of examples of how a retaining wall can like really like change the landscape here. It can affect drainage. It can also, if there's a lot of fill and it's not built correctly, it poses the threat of collapse and damage to another property in that event. So this is our home as it was being rebuilt, and this is the side that abuts the neighbor's property. This is what the neighbor's property looked like prior to the retaining wall. And then this was what was built. This was the retaining wall that was built. in that space. And as you can tell, like, it abuts, our deck in our house was pre-existing, and it's right there. Like, like it's about 6 inches from our actual deck. But what's more concerning is that it's very, very close to the foundation of our home. And as you can tell, this is all fill, essentially, that was brought in. It's about, at the closest point, it's about 27 inches from our home, and unfortunately did cause flooding into our basement. And so I think this is an example of how a retaining wall, when it's built on the property line, can impact a neighboring structure when the neighboring structure is pre-existing and non-conforming. And this is pretty common. So I did a little bit of research, actually. So, on our street in Howard Avenue, there's 9 houses on this side, and 3 of them have a home that's within 3 or 4 feet of the property line. So there's our home, because obviously these lines are not correct. So when you look at this, our home is within, 3 feet of the property line. The home next to us is within a foot of the property line. And then the home right here is within 3 feet of the property line as well. So just from the sample of 9 homes, there's 3 that are in this situation where a retaining wall that is on the property line could significantly affect the neighboring home. And so I do agree that I think there should be some kind of a mechanism within the regulations to say that, if there's a structure within a certain amount of feet, then it does just need to be set back from the property line, the height of the wall, or something like that. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say, but I just wanted to share that this is this is something that's happening, and honestly, it might happen more often because there just is a lot more density within the town. Yeah. And the other thing that it poses a problem too is like maintenance on that side of the home, especially for folks who are even closer to the property line. And I'll share another example of what that looks like if I can find it. Let's see. Yeah, so for example, this is 30 Howard right here, if you can see this. And this is us. So this is the other side of our property. This is our fence, and this is their house. So as you can tell, there's literally like a foot. And if we decided to, bring fill in, create a 2-foot retaining wall, I mean, they wouldn't even be able to like service this part of their foundation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Other members of the public wish to comment?
Oh,
Evan?
sorry, Marjorie, I just muted you.
That's not very friendly, Evan. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. I'm Attorney Marjorie Shansky, and I had no intention on participating in this part of your meeting this evening, which has now been weaponized. I want to say that there may be the emergence of this issue through the commissioner, who I believe has been, and I am happy to stand corrected, but I believe has been engaged by the prior testifier, just radiates conflict in a very disturbing way. And, but I want to verify that. And so I'm delighted that the commission is going to do research with Jen and with Jane to get the more insight into the 10-year enforcement of this interpretation of the regulation. I have my copy of the residential building code. R105.2 has an explicit exemption for retaining walls that are not higher than 3 feet. And because my copy of the building code is not the most recent one, I have checked at the ICC website, and I believe the exemption may have, although I need to check the Connecticut supplement, may have been expanded to a 4-foot retaining wall being exempt from a building permit. And I do believe, though I am speculating, but it is rational to me, that there's some correlation between this exemption from the building code with the non-enforcement of zoning permit requirement for a retaining wall 3 feet or under back to 2015. I'll leave it at that, but I will be submitting a writing that's more fleshed out. But then the other comment I want to make, I was in a meeting with Evan on something else this week, and he mentioned that DEEP letter about section 6.8. And I have sought and I am seeking 6.8 special exceptions. And the only, in my current example, the only requirement that brings me to the commission is that I am within 100 feet of an inland wetland, not a coastal resource, an inland wetland. And I've been to the Inland Wetlands Commission with this plan project, and I have an approval. And so coming to the Planning and Zoning Commission on an inland wetland, not a coastal resource, is a redundant exercise, which seems to me doesn't have really substantive value. And I make the distinction between deep interest, and we're all interested in avoiding adverse impacts to coastal resources, inland wetlands, and all of that. But DEEP's interest in coastal resources is different than the Branford Inland Wetlands and Watercourses interest in their regulated resources and their upland review area, because they are an actual sovereign agency within the town of Branford that makes decisions. And to have the cross-jurisdictional redundancy can create conflict between those two agencies. From DEEP's perspective, DEEP writes letters and comments on coastal site plan applications, and it's advisory to the commission. So that DEEP may say one thing about a proposal that is critical or complementary doesn't bind you, the Planning and Zoning Commission, to go whichever way in your wisdom you go. So the fact that that DEEP would prefer that you keep 100 feet from coastal resources, that I think that makes sense from their perspective and possibly from your perspective. And I don't think that it is contradictory to then just adopt the 25-foot review for inland wetlands, because it's a different agency with a different statute pursuant to which it's operating and a different resource that it's governing, and they will continue to govern it. And so I wanted to simply reject the notion that it's possible to do both things, to satisfy DEEP and its interest in coastal resources, and to eliminate some redundancy and avoid cross-jurisdictional conflict by reducing the look-back period or the margin of review for inland wetlands. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shansky. Did you indicate that you'd be submitting something in writing?
I will.
Okay, so I'm just wondering, we're probably going to keep the hearing open, but just another something to keep in mind. So thank you.
Thank you.
Other members of the public wish to comment? Evan, you see anyone?
I do not see anybody else.
Okay. Okay. Sounds like we want to keep this public hearing open. Again, there's no deadline because it's a commission-sponsored amendment. It sounds like there's a few things that additional things that want to happen. One is the 6.13.c, the retaining wall issue. That's a big one. Get more information both from Jane Ellis and from our former CEO and now engineer on the issues, get a little history, maybe look at other towns, and Harry, you can come back to us on that. And then I know also you wanted to compile everything too, Harry. You wanted to get everything together. I don't know if we'll be ready to vote close the hearing and vote or not. It sounds like there's still, you also wanted to revise the downtown question, the density for the downtown, even, you know, you had the 31, you want to have some new language, so there may be some additional stuff. And then you want to put the whole thing together, I think. Yeah. So anyway, I think those are things, we can see where we are after we do that. And,
yeah, I'm also aware that I think there are several public hearings scheduled for the 6th, so we can certainly continue to the 6th, and how much time there is how much time there is, and see how far we can get. I'll get as much input as I can get together. I mean, maybe at least if it's possible to get both Jane Ellis and Jen Aquino on the meeting, or either that or something in writing, possibly. Whatever time we have in the 6th maybe could be devoted to that at least. Okay. Because it's hard it's hard to ask them to, you know, come to night meetings, all of a sudden they get squeezed out because there's a lot of hearings or something.
Right. No, we could try to get them on. And if the 6th doesn't work, we could do it the 20th. I don't know what our agenda, Evans, or what we're looking at for the next couple of meetings. And maybe we don't know fully yet, but
okay. So I will start integrating everything into one document, assuming that I did not hear a lot of negative feedback about the handful of changes other than the 2 issues we just talked about.
Okay.
Talked about with others.
Okay. So then we'll continue this public hearing to our next meeting on March 6th, a regular Zoom meeting starting at 7 p.m. It'll be on that meeting, so that we'll continue this. And we'll go from there. So with that, then, I think that completes our public hearing items. No, let's see. No, there's item number 5. I think, yeah, that's, did we open and continue 5 yet, Evan? I don't think I've even reached it. Did we?
We have not. They need to go to the town center board. So we open and continue to the March 20th meeting.
Right. So if you're here on number 5, this is Lauren Wiggins, applicant, Meadow Street Properties owner. This is 151, 155 Meadow Street. Special exception for a church and or place of worship. And we are going to open this matter and continue to our March 20th meeting. This would allow the Town Center Review Board to review the application, hopefully have that done. So we'll open continue item number 5 to our March 20th meeting, also a Zoom meeting. So with that, that completes our public hearing items. So why don't we cover the 2 public hearing items that we may be able to act on. The first one is item number 2, which is 15 Etzel Road. This is a special section coastal site plan for grading. Vince Federico, Evan, maybe if you can pull that one up. I think at both of there were no public comments on this application. Deep was okay with it. The project's been done. I guess it's an after the fact application, I guess. So I don't know if anyone had any comments, and Evan, I think you did review these with us. These are the conditions, the findings, and the 4 conditions. I think you summarized them during the public hearing. They're pretty standard. So if anyone has any comments, and if not, someone want to make a motion to approve the application by adopting the findings and 4 conditions in the staff report.
Chadwick makes that motion.
Motion to approve and adopt the findings and conditions by Joe Chadwick. Is there a second?
Fred Russo, seconds.
Second by Fred. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Joe Chadwick.
Joe Chadwick is in favor.
Fred Russo.
Fred Russo in favor.
Joe Vayuso.
Joe Vayuso in favor.
Marcy.
Marcy's in favor.
And Chair is also in favor. So that application's approved. Then turning to the next one is 32 Wood Road. Again, similarly, this was a Special exception coastal site plan, Mr. Preddy presented that to us. We had approved an earlier one. And this is this application, it spares the house, keeps the old house there and just moves it, which I think pleased the neighbors. Neighbors did submit some letters in support. I think, Evan, you had that one condition about the additional plantings for the buffer, and for adding salt tolerant plantings, and the applicant was fine with that one. So, so Evan, how many conditions were there now? So that would be condition number 3, that additional condition, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So, so with that, I think, and I think again, it's the standard conditions, frankly, about erosion, lighting, and then also the plants there. So with that, does anyone have any comments? If not, someone want to make motion to approve the application by adopting the findings and the 3 conditions, including the additional condition that's on the staff report.
Fred Russo will make that motion.
Motion approved by Fred. Is there a second?
Chadwick seconds.
Second by Joe Chadwick. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Joe Chadwick,
Joe Chadwick is in favor.
Fred Russo,
Fred Russo's in favor.
Joe Vayuso,
Joe Vayuso in favor.
Marcy,
Marcy's in favor.
and Chair is also in favor. Okay, brings us down to old business, and I think all of these items, item number 1 is all these items either have 2, 3, and 4 have public hearings scheduled for, I think, our next meeting. And then item number 1, we haven't scheduled the public hearing yet, but that will be done. I assume that's 38 Howard Avenue for that one, special exception for grading. So nothing to do with the old business other to acknowledge that they're coming up. We'll have the public hearings 3 out of the 4, and then the other one will be scheduled. For new business, item number 1 and 2, that's the Cut and 2 Island. Those are the 2 additional special exceptions. Remember, we opened and continued the public hearing on one of the special exception for the accessory apartment, and these 2 are going to go with that. So we'll probably hear those on March 6th. And then item number 3, we'll have to set a public hearing for that, special exception for dwelling units. So that brings us then to minutes, which I think were sent out, or minutes for our February 6th meeting. People had a chance to review those, and if so, anyone want to make a motion with respect to the February 6th minutes?
Joe Vayuso moves to approve the minutes.
Motion by Joe Vayuso to approve the February 6th minutes. Is there a second?
Fred Russo will second.
Second by Fred. Further discussion. All those in favor, Joe Chadwick,
Joe Chadwick is in favor.
Fred Russo,
Fred Russo in favor.
Joe Vayuso,
Joe Vayuso in favor.
Marcy,
Sure. In favor.
and Chair also in favor. So those minutes are approved. Correspondence. Any correspondence? I think, Evan, did you send us something today? Or
Yeah, I did send around a request for an informal discussion at the March 20th P&Z Commission meeting about potential multifamily at 100 Commercial Park.
Okay. I assume that makes sense. We don't have anything big going on then?
No, I think we only have a few public hearings scheduled. Nothing, I think, out of the norm. So I think it's a relatively light schedule.
Okay. So we'll probably do that. And if you want to give us anything else in advance before the meeting, you can encourage, I suppose, the applicants so we know what they want to talk about.
Sure. I'll ask them for some materials prior to the meeting.
Sure. Any other correspondence?
No, that's it.
Okay. And then other business, anything, anything you have, Evan?
Nope.
Okay. I do have, one quick thing that, that has come up is, the, I was speaking with Harry and also with Peter Henschel regarding a proposed ordinance, that's being proposed in the RTM about regulation of short-term rentals. Um, the background of that is that, that's a use, short-term rentals, Airbnb and so forth. There's been a debate about the regulation and the allowance and prohibiting and whether you can do them or not. And our commission, I think, took an interpretation that, anything, I think that we would consider short-term rentals for a week or longer to be an accessory use of a dwelling, so that it was allowed, but it had to be a week or longer. We don't have anything explicitly in our regulations in that. What's happened is as you can expect, there's pros and cons of Airbnbs. The pros are that they're an income source for people. People like to do it, and they provide benefits to the public, and they're popular, particularly where there's water views and nice places. And Branford has lots of water views. Downsides is that they may create nuisance complaints, particularly if properties are close together, which water properties happen to be. People could come in and, play loud music, and kind of destroys fabrics of the neighborhood. And it may even decrease housing supply because people buy them up and there's no place for permanent residents because they just want to use it as an income source. There's been, we had Pine Orchard, which has their own zoning, had adopted a zoning regulation that basically limited rentals to months at a month minimum. So I think everyone said, "Oh, you can rent, for longer periods." That's always been part of what you can do for a single family. But these, Airbnbs, that's a commercial thing. That's like a hotel or motel. You shouldn't be able to allow that. And there's been litigation that's gone on throughout the countries, and they've gone on back and forth. Well, it so happened that our own Pine Orchard was the subject of the regulations in Pine Orchard went up to the Supreme Court, because sure enough, someone in Pine Orchard had a dwelling, and they said, "Aha, I've been using it as an Airbnb for a decade. So even though you amended your regulations, I have a legal nonconformity, so I could continue to do it." And what Pine Orchard said is that, well, even under the old regulations, it's a residential dwelling that prohibits Airbnb, because a residential dwelling includes some permanence, and that you're going to be there for a while, not these hotel in and out type of totally commercial ventures. So it's prohibited even under the old regulations. We didn't even need to amend them. So that was the debate, and Supreme Court said, yes, you can rent them. That a dwelling does, unless you explicitly say there's some durational element to the rental, there's no logical way to pick a week or a month or anything else and just say that's what a residence is. And it does allow short-term rentals. What I think that means is that our regulation and our policy, which we've adopted, which we said a week, that you could do it for a week, that frankly would not hold up in light of that Supreme Court decision. Anyway, last year, the legislature amended the statutes to say you can regulate these by ordinance. And so the RTM is doing that. And they have a proposal of what, it's Peter Henschel is on the subcommittee that's working on that. He did get in touch with Harry, and I spoke with him today. Bottom line is that I think the general proposal is that the proposal is to allow Airbnbs. So even for dailies, except for seasonal dwellings. And there aren't many seasonal dwellings that don't have winterized places in Branford, except maybe some Thimble Islands or something. So, which would be great targets for short-term rentals, but there's not many of them. So the bottom line is that they're working on that. There's a summary sheet that if anyone's interested, Peter sent it to Harry and sent it to me, and you can look it around. And if anyone is interested in this, you can contact Peter Henschel directly or get involved, because the RTM is going through a regulatory process. So that's any question from anyone about any of that?
Can I ask who Peter Henschel is?
Yes, he's a member of the RTM. I think he was one of the sponsors. Remember we did the landscaping regulations? He was one of the guys. Yeah. So, and if you have interest, Harry, I think you have his contact information, which you can give to, since you don't work here anymore, Harry, right? You still can, but, or you could, if anyone's interested, you could contact Evan or me, and I'll pass it on. I think that is all I have. Does anyone else have anything? I didn't know this. Evan, you mentioned this. Remember the oil change one at the intersection by Aldi's? They came in that we denied. It was a yeah. There's been an appeal on that. And I expect there may be some. I think there was we may be talking to our town attorney on that. So just so people know that. So, and then if we did talk to our town attorney, that would be an executive session. Anything else from anyone? If not, then I guess someone can make a motion to adjourn.
Fred Russo makes that motion.
Motion adjourned by Fred. Is there a second?
Chadwick will second.
Second by Joe Chadwick. Any further discussion? All in favor? Joe Chadwick?
Joe Chadwick is in favor.
Fred Russo?
Fred Russo in favor.
Joe Vayuso?
Joe Vayuso in favor.
Marcy?
Marcy's in favor.
And Chair's also in favor. Good night, everyone.
This program was brought to you in part through the support of the Town of Branford. Watch town meetings and other videos on demand at BranfordTV.org.